Hello, this is Todd Wall from Aquatongue Media, and I saw an article that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to discuss it. I think the one thing that's missing from the article, I'm going to add to it, and it's really talking at a high level about retirement and maybe retirement, comfortable retirement. Many people are seeing it more, out of access than it was in the past, but they're not really talking about why, and I think I want to add the why in. So the title of the article is "The American Dream of Retiring at 65 and Living Comfortably Off Savings Completely Dead?" Maybe not, but here's why it's on life support. And in the article, you can see an older gentleman. I guess he's probably staring at some kind of record of his financial worth, and he's looking sort of worried about that. In any event, the article begins. The American dream is to retire at 65, if not sooner, and spend your golden years living comfortably off your savings. But 82% of American workers say achieving that dream is harder than it was for their parents' generation, according to a CNBC retirement survey. 4 in 10 American workers, 40%, say they're behind on their retirement savings, while 69% are worried they won't be able to fully retire. Why? Almost half, 48%, say they're struggling with debt or loans, or they simply don't have enough to put into retirement savings. So you've got a generation, basically, they feel like, they're concerned about retirement, and they see that in the past, people could retire comfortably. Um, and I think they're going to touch on it a little bit later in the article. I mean, in the past, you could have someone who has a well-paying blue collar kind of factory job, who's able to buy a house and comfortably retire and maybe have a pension. And obviously, those things don't exist anymore. So the article continues. That means retiring at 65 looks increasingly uncertain for younger Americans. And while the dream may not be completely dead, it's on life support. Yet it doesn't mean they're doomed to a miserable existence in their golden years. So I think this is the interesting part of the article. They talk about why young Americans are struggling. So it doesn't just seem harder for younger Americans to save for retirement, it actually is harder. Life events are getting more expensive, from going to school to buying a house to raising kids to paying for medical care. So here's where it gets really interesting. After crunching the numbers, Consumer Affairs came to some rather sobering conclusions. In terms of how prices have changed since 1970 relative to inflation, Gen Z dollars today have 86% less purchasing power than those from when baby boomers were in their 20s. 86% less um, is quite significant. Public and private school tuition has increased by 310% and 245%, 45% respectively since the 1970s, and Gen Z is paying 37% more per gallon of gas. While the dollar isn't stretching as far, Gen Z is also making less money relative to what baby boomers were earning at their age. So the article continues. Despite wages increasing since 1970, they haven't even come close to keeping up with the massive increase in the cost of goods over the last 50 years, according to the Consumer Affairs analysis. Now, here's the part of the article. Here's the meat of the article, and kind of really what I want to focus on. Case in point, housing. In 1970, the median home price in the United States was 17,000, according to Better, a fintech mortgage provider. Adjusted for inflation to 2020 dollars, the median home price would still only be 112,000. Compare that to the actual cost of a house, which sat at 412,000 in Q2 2024, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Home prices are out of reach for many younger Americans, but even rent is skyrocketing, which in turn makes it harder to save for a down payment. So, the real issue here is that, um, you know, almost 20 years ago, roughly 2008, after the financial crisis, the government instituted a policy of quantitative easing where they bought, when I say the government, the Federal Reserve basically instituted a policy of quantitative easing where they bought bonds and treasury bills, and it had the net impact of basically reducing interest rates. And so that reduction in interest rate at the time was meant to kind of spur the economy, to avoid the economy going into a recession. But what it's really done it's kind of really made. If you want to think about, there's three pillars to basically a younger person developing a successful life. Um, Financially, in terms of their career, in terms of finances, going to college, buying a home, and investing in the stock market. And essentially, what this did was make this quantitative easing effectively made all these three things more expensive. It definitely made college more expensive. Um, Homes became more expensive as a result of lower interest rates. Borrowers could afford more, so home prices went up. And then the stock market also went up in response to interest rates going down. And essentially, um, these are kind of the things that a younger person would invest in to grow their wealth. You would buy a house, you would invest in the stock market, you would expect to get reasonable returns. And so, this this Federal Reserve quantitative easing policy, effectively what it did, if you want to think about it, it pulled the appreciation in the house market and the stock market forward. So instead of house prices doubling every 10 years, pick a number, it caused that to happen much more in a much shorter period of time. And so it's made everything more expensive. And it's unlikely that these things can continue to appreciate at the rate that we've seen over the past 15, 20 years, just because there's a lower bound. I mean, technically there's not. Technically, interest rates can go negative, but there's a lower bound to interest rates. And once you juice the economy and lower interest rates, you can lower them to zero. Um, then what's left? It's sort of like you shoot your there's the cliche, keep your gunpowder dry. You shoot your guns off, and then when you have a real emergency, what do you have left? Yeah, you have no gun to fire. So this is really what's been happening. Um, the article continues. It touches on younger Americans hope to travel and pursue hobbies in retirement. Um, there's also a concern about Social Security benefits. I guess everyone's concerned about Social Security. I personally don't think Social Security is at risk. I think there's too much political damage. I think anyone who touches Social Security, there's too much political damage, and they can just inflate their way. Um, they can inflate their way out of it. So, interest rates. Uh, Recently, the Federal Reserve announced they were going to lower rates by half a percentage point. I think we're going to continue to see moves, even though stock market's at an all-time high. House prices continue to be at an all-time high. I think we're going to continue to see the Federal Reserve lower interest rates. That's going to contribute to, I think, stock prices getting higher and home prices continuing to rise. And I think it's going to make the situation for, younger people who are planning for their retirement, it's going to make it more dire and more difficult. So, um, in any event, I thought this article was interesting, but again, I wanted to bring it up because I wanted to discuss it because I didn't think it was really focused on the primary issue, which is driving a lot of this difficulty that younger people are seeing in terms of planning for their retirement. But I'd be interested in knowing and getting your opinion. What did you think? And do you think my opinion is correct? I would love to hear your comments in the comment section below. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. And I hope everyone is having a good weekend. And until next time, take care.